it just makes you want to pull your hair out. I mean, that's why Ryan Thorpe has the hair he does now, because he has to deal with the shenanigans going on with this access to information system.
So joining us today is the ever-popular, ever-charismatic Franco Terrazzano, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, and with him is Ryan Thorpe, who is an investigative journalist with the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. And guys, we are very curious. You guys just put out a announcement recently about taking CBC to court. What the heck is going on, and what have they done or not done?
Yeah, we just launched another court challenge, another legal fight. We're taking the CBC to the federal court because they're not releasing documents that all taxpayers have a right to see. Okay, so Ryan will get into it in a second, but our great investigative journalist, he filed an access to information request demanding that the CBC be upfront and transparent with Canadians about how they spend our money, right? How much money are you spending on advertising, promoting yourself, the CBC? The CBC refused to disclose the number and cost to taxpayers, and so we said, no way, this is violating the fundamental principle of our democracy and government transparency, which is this: if you take taxpayers' money, you have the duty to be transparent with taxpayers on how you spend our money. And because the CBC was unwilling, they didn't want to release the documents, the cost, well, we're just not going to take it. We went to federal court, and we're going to set the precedent that if they want to spend our money, if they want to take our money, then they got to be transparent in how they're spending it.
Well, and this is very timely, especially because right now they're 70% funded by taxpayers, and B, if the Liberal government has their way, it sounds like they're going to be 100% funded by taxpayers and then some. So absolutely, if you're taking that much of taxpayer money, if you're spending it on bonuses for executives despite firing hundreds of people, I think we absolutely have a right to know how they're spending their money. So Ryan, why don't you dig into this for us?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the genesis of the initial access to information request was just, I've seen CBC ads on TV before. I've seen them on social media. I know that they also do CBC merchandise and stuff, promotional material. And so I just got curious, how much of their, budget are they allocating to advertising? So in January of 2024 is, I guess, when this all really begins. I filed the access to information request. I sought aggregate data, so nothing specific. It's not like particular line items. How much did you spend on this particular ad or anything like that? Just the big picture. How much money for the calendar years of 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 did the CBC spend on advertising? In March of 2024, we got back a record from the CBC, and it was almost entirely redacted. So it didn't, they spent the time to write out the number, and then they just blacked it all out, providing absolutely no transparency to taxpayers. They're trying to justify this by pointing to Section 18B of the Access to Information Act, which claims that governments can refuse to disclose records or information if it's going to prejudice their competitive advantage or interfere with contract negotiations. But we really don't think that this argument holds muster. Our general counsel at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation certainly doesn't think this is a strong justification. And so this month we did file a lawsuit against the CBC in federal court to force their hand and get them to disclose this information, because as Franco said, look, this is taxpayer money, and when you're spending taxpayer money, you have to be upfront with the public about what you're doing with it. I mean, that's pretty basic and simple, and I think it's a principle that most Canadians would agree with.
Well, and Franco, is there previous precedents that you guys are going to be leaning on when it comes to filing for access to information requests regarding the CBC and other costs?
I mean, before we even look at like previous precedent, okay, there's a couple things we have to remember. Number one, it is the duty of the government, right, to be transparent with taxpayers. I mean, like, look, by refusing to provide information essential for public debate, they're actually violating our ability to scrutinize government spending, right? So under the charter, freedom of expression, and it includes a right to access government information when access is required for democratic participation and accountability. But like, even if you set aside that issue against freedom of expression in Canada, where the government refuses to give information to the public about how it's spending, we're also just going to poke holes in the CBC's argument, right? Because many times we have seen, and I can get into some of these other cases where the government uses these phony baloney excuses not to come clean with taxpayers about how they're spending our money, right? So Ryan referenced Section 18B, what the CBC is claiming as the reason they can't release this information. Well, that essentially is them saying like, hey, we can't tell taxpayers the overall blanket of how much money we're spending on advertising because that would hurt our business model competitively. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? For two reasons. Number one is that we're not asking for, how much did they spend on a specific ad at a specific time. All that we're asking is for them to give us a specific annual cost for their entire marketing budget, right? That doesn't hurt their competitive position as a corporation. We don't care how much you spent on this specific ad. We want to know the total dollar amount that you spent over an entire year. Taxpayers deserve to know that. But number two, and this is a specific legal nuance, right, of the argument for Section 18B. In order for that section to apply, the CBC or any government body has to show actual harm done. Okay, actual harm done. They can't just point to a hypothetical potential harm from an access to information request. They actually have to show that this has and will cause specific harm. Now, Ryan, I just want to bring up the fact that I mentioned, like, look, governments all the time use these phony baloney reasons to keep information from the public. And let me explain to you another legal challenge that the CTF brought forward that illustrates this. So we'll now all remember the time that Trudeau spent $6,000 per night on a hotel room during the Queen's funeral. Yep. And do you remember everyone in Canada knew it was Trudeau, right? Everyone knew, but the government refused to admit it. Well, the CTF launched a legal challenge because we also filed an access to information request with the government to get the name of the person who stayed in that room. And what the government did is they wrote down Justin Trudeau's name and then they blacked it out. Okay? and the reason, listen to their explanation, guys, okay? Listen to one of their explanations. They had two reasons for why they redacted Justin Trudeau's name. The first reason was like this personal information reason, which doesn't pass the sniff test, because if you are on the taxpayer dole and you're spending taxpayers' money, that doesn't apply to you. But listen to the other explanation they gave. They said that they couldn't put down Justin Trudeau's name 6 months after he stayed in the hotel for security reasons. It's like they were worried about the Terminator going back in time to London, England. It was ridiculous.
I can just imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger busting through the hotel lobby. I need your clothes, your boots, and your prime minister.
But
give me
that's
a break.
just exactly. And I just use that point to show that because we file about 1,000 access to information requests a year. Especially Ryan, we're used to getting these absolutely bogus reasons from the government as to why they can't be transparent with taxpayers. We don't let that fly, right? Because not only are we pushing for lower taxes, we're pushing for more transparent and more accountable government. And the only way the government can be accountable with taxpayers is if taxpayers actually know how our money is being spent. So we've heard these silly excuses from the government again. We've never taken their excuse, and we're not going to take it from the CBC either.
Well, and if you wanted to even go further, the CBC could use that exact same excuse for literally any access to information request for any expense that you want to know from them. Oh, you want to know how much we pay our executives? Well, if we reveal that, that would reveal, potentially a competitive advantage that we may have over other organizations, or, literally anything, how much we spend on equipment, how much we spend on accommodations, what have you. So yeah, that sounds like a lot of malarkey to me.
And sorry, let me just jump in here, because they do use that explanation. So now you guys will remember all the news about $18 million in taxpayer funded bonuses last year at the CBC, $132 million in bonuses going back to 2015. That information was originally dug up by Ryan Thorpe, the original bonus trail. That was from the CTF and Ryan Thorpe, our investigative journalist here. However, that's actually just the bonuses for the non-union staff, the managers, and the executives. Well, the CBC has 7 senior executives, okay, even on top of that. Okay, and so we filed an access to information request to get the bonus figures for the 7 senior executives at the CBC, and the CBC is refusing to release that information. So we also launched a legal fight against them for that as well. So just to your point, Ryan and Tanya, they do use these types of excuses all the time, and we're not going to let that fly.
So Ryan, when you're filing these ATIPs, are you already preparing yourself for the fact that they're going to come back and try and block you at every turn when you're filing them the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. Franco mentioned the Justin Trudeau $6,000 per night hotel, and I think it's actually a really helpful example, because everyone knows, like the government knows, that if they are able to kick the can down the road, the longer the time goes on, the less damaging sensitive information. So they're incentivized to try and drag this out as much as possible. And what happened in that particular case was that we launched this legal challenge. They knew that they were going to lose in court because these exemptions were absolutely bogus. And so what did they do? They turned around and they waited until Joe Biden came to visit Canada, and then they leaked it to the Canadian press. It was just like a classic bad news dump. Wait till something big is going on and then get this damaging information out into the public while people are distracted. So pretty much whenever I'm filing access to information requests, I expect that it's going to be a long, kind of dragged out process. I expect them to put up roadblocks every step of the way. Occasionally things are processed, on time, promptly, and you do get, records released that are unredacted. But I would say that's the exception, not the rule. What generally happens is, they do everything they can to stonewall.
So for our audience who may not know, what is like a typical turnaround time for an ATIP?
Yeah, so after you file an access to information request with the federal government, they have 30 days to respond to you. But the response is just like the initial acknowledgement, hey, we got this, and we're beginning the process. So it's not like you're going to get the records. Then often what they do is they ask for extensions. So this is allowed under the legislation. They can apply an extension in terms of the timeline for when you're going to get access to these records. But often the extensions are absolutely absurd. I've seen some that are like a year. They're often saying, like, we need 280 days to be able to process like a basic records request. So then if you want to dispute this, what you have to do is you have to file a challenge with the Office of the Information Commissioner, which is the body that oversees the federal access to information system. It usually takes like 6 to 8 months before they even assign an investigator, an OIC investigator, to start looking at your complaint. And then it could be, a year before you get a ruling. So often this is just a very kind of long, drawn out process. And, I'm sure many people remember the Trudeau government, when it came to power, they talked about making government kind of open by default. They said that they were going to overhaul and reform the access to information system and really improve it, because it's quite broken in Canada. And they haven't followed through on any of those commitments. And I don't think it's really in their interest to do so, right? They have a broken system that makes it that's very cumbersome to navigate, and it's very slow to actually get records into the hands of, journalists or citizens, anyone who's interested. And I think that's the way they like it. because often they don't want to be transparent with the public, and they don't want people to know the ways in which that they are spending and wasting our money.
Well, and he was famously quoted as saying, "This is going to be the most transparent government in history."
I think we all know how that turned out.
Well, he didn't know the difference between the terms misinformation and disinformation. Maybe he doesn't understand what transparency means either. So, I don't know.
Franco, just one thing I would add. Franco mentioned we have another ongoing legal challenge against the CBC. So this isn't the first time with the CBC where they're failing to offer Canadians basic levels of transparency. And in the other case, what we requested was yet again aggregate data. In terms of the senior executives, we weren't saying, how much did each individual get as a bonus. We wanted to know the total bonus figure for the senior executives, and they're refusing to release that, which to me is just like, I don't know, the audacity of that. We're funded by taxpayers, we're taking our money, we're giving large bonuses to our senior executives who are already very well compensated, but when the people who pay the bills want to know how much we're allocating to bonuses, go kick rocks. Like that's simply unacceptable.
Well, and Franco, what is, because I'll take it one step further, and no doubt this is what the CTF is perpetually frustrated by. So you file these ATIPs, they refuse, you have to take them to court. Now they're using taxpayer money on lawyers to defend the entire access to information request, which they're going to lose anyway. So they are spending even more taxpayer money trying to not give taxpayers the information they deserve.
Yeah. I mean, you put it, I don't know, right? Like you put it so well. I don't, it just makes you want to pull your hair out. I mean, that's why Ryan Thorpe has the hair he does now, because he has to deal with the shenanigans going on with this access to information system. Ryan and Tanya, I'm not sure if you've already covered what Minister St. Onge is trying to do with the CBC in a previous episode, but she's actually trying to further duck accountability around the CBC's funding, right?
Yes.
So
we haven't talked about it, but it is insane what she's trying to do.
Can I get into it a little bit here, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Because this is another issue here, right? So a lot of your listeners and audience, I know they're very engaged politically, so they might have already heard, the kind of juicy big headline where the minister is proposing to nearly double the cost of the CBC to taxpayers, right? So the CBC right now, it costs us $1.4 billion a year, and under what St. Onge is proposing is a CBC would take about $2.5 billion from taxpayers every year. Well, what's $2.5 billion? That's about enough money to pay for the groceries annually of about 150,000 Canadian families. So that's a ton of money. But what the sneaky part of St. Onge's announcement was how they want to change the funding around the CBC. They want to remove the CBC from the normal budgeting process. Okay, so what happens is every year the government outlines a budget and its spending priorities. We're going to waste $1 billion here, $1 billion there, $1 billion everywhere, and then at least our members of parliament have a chance to vote on that spending.
Yeah, because they're line items on the budget.
Exactly. That's how the democratic process is supposed to work. Now, what St. Onge is doing would duck accountability. I would say reduce transparency as well. They want to remove the CBC funding from that budget process and entrench CBC funding into law so that every year the CBC will get a certain amount of money from the taxpayer, and yet our members of parliament will not be voting on that amount of money every year. Do you see what's going on, right? The whole point of our democracy and the whole reason we pay these MPs massive six-figure salaries is so that they can vote on taxes and spending. But under St. Onge's proposal, there wouldn't be votes on the CBC spending every year. Complete duck of accountability.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Franco, the other thing that she wanted to do is almost remove it as a line item on the budget, and it would be rolled up into another like miscellaneous funding line item, so you wouldn't actually see the CBC called out. That was my understanding as well. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know about that per se. I mean, there's also issues with the budget where it's very difficult to find exactly how much the CBC is getting until the annual reports. Like, that's really how you find out how much money the CBC will get in the year, is almost after, when you can look at their most recent annual report. But think about it this way. Okay, so I like to compare it to how politicians are paid, right? So there's an act of parliament which sets politicians' pay. And every year they get a pay raise without voting on it or anything. It's just set in the legislation that you're going to get this amount of money every year, and it increases every year based on this criteria. That is what they want to do with the CBC, where you remove the funding from the normal budget process, where there's votes every year, and every year, baked into the legislation, the CBC will get more money based on some type of formula.
Yeah, so note it would follow inflation or something like that. And at that point, why do we even need CBC executives? Because there's no reason to actually measure performance. There's no reason to keep KPIs because it doesn't matter what they do. They're going to get the same amount of funding.
Or more.
So what's the point?
I love that. I actually never thought about it. Maybe that's the easiest way to end the CBC bonuses.
Because really, they're supposed to hit all these targets, and they've demonstrated this year that even with 70% taxpayer funding, they don't have to hit them. They can just fire a bunch of people and not hire a bunch of positions, and then say, hey, well, yeah, we sucked this year, so I guess we'll just pay ourselves bonuses and hope for the best next year.
And can I just... Sorry, let me just add that is actually the fundamental issue with having government in the business of business, right? Is you remove all actual checks and balances on a business enterprise, right? And like, make no mistake about it, the CBC is essentially a government corporation, right? And there's many of them. Think Via Rail, think Canada Post, et cetera, et cetera. But when you remove a business enterprise from the market, then you actually lose the true checks and balances of accountability, i.e., are you actually providing people with a good service? If the CBC was just a private corporation, like any other type of independent media in Canada, well, then they would actually have to perform well, or they would lose customers, they would lose eyeballs, they would lose advertising. But the way it is, as it's run by the government, paid for by taxpayers, they don't actually have to worry about what their customers think, because every year they just get more and more money from taxpayers. And even though they're doing bad, what do? They run cap in hand to the government, crying and begging for more taxpayer cash. And with the current government in power, who is all too happy to waste taxpayers' money on everything, they just give them more cash.
One thing I would just add is that these recommendations from the Heritage Minister, it comes out of her CBC modernization panel. So we also filed access to information requests on this. They spent hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars putting together this panel. They stacked the panel with a bunch of ex-CBCers, including the now new president of the CBC, who was on this panel. So let's waste a bunch of taxpayer money getting a bunch of ex-CBCers together to give advice to the Heritage Minister. And surprise, surprise, the recommendations come out, hey, let's drastically increase the CBC's annual funding, and let's also decrease the level of transparency that it would be operating with when it comes to the amount of public funds that it's getting. And then you also mentioned, Ryan, the KPIs and CBC bonuses. And we've crunched some numbers on that. They're often not hitting their KPIs, and they're still rubber stamping tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded bonuses anyways.
Well, and we learned in committee that I think it was budget 324, they drastically underperformed on their KPIs. So then they took the same KPIs and significantly reduced them. Magically, they hit a bunch of their targets.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, well, I guess we did really well this year. We deserve bonuses. And it's just insane to me. Like I've worked for broadcasting corporations before, and if we didn't hit our revenue targets, then we didn't get bonus pays. Now that's how it works in the private sector. But this is the crazy thing about about the CBC is Catherine Tate. I think we looked at her minimum salary. Her minimum was around $400,000 if she was paid on the low end, and I think $600 on the high end, something like that. And then what, a 23% or 30% bonus on top of that. So, and then she didn't want to answer in committee if she was going to be paid a bonus. But her answer was, well, we don't receive bonuses.
Of course.
We receive performance pay.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is just another word for a bonus. But hey, you know what's even crazier about that? Two things. So, number one, I mentioned the documents, the internal CBC records that Ryan dug up showing the bonuses at the CBC. So, on the CBC's own internal records that we got, they say bonus right on the records.
Oh my God.
So you have like CBC president and CEO Catherine Tate at the time crying about misinformation and then telling a parliamentary committee that they don't hand out bonuses while her own organization's documents have the word bonus right on it. Like you couldn't make this up, folks.
And then the CBC, like we were banging the drum on this bonus issue for quite a while. And then finally the CBC issued a statement where they said, you know, we concede that there's like a perception problem here and that some people have very strong feelings about, you know, the level of bonuses that we've been handing out every year. So what was their solution? Well, we're going to hire a third-party firm to do a review of our compensation scheme, including bonuses. So translation, we're going to spend even more of your money hiring,
Consulting firm.
A consultant to tell us whether or not we should keep awarding ourselves with tens of millions of dollars in bonuses every year. It's just like, no, just stop. Just stop.
Well, and I remember us even commenting on that fact because that fact came out in committee as well. And my question was, well, then why do we need you? Why do we need these executives? Why do we need the CEO if you're just going to go and ask somebody else, hey, are we paying ourselves appropriately here? Like, isn't that what HR department's for? Isn't that what the chief HR officer is usually for? Isn't that what the CFO is usually? Anyway, like we'll just descend into to screaming about how silly this organization actually is.
So circling back, you guys have filed this lawsuit. What's the timeline on this? What do you expect to happen next? When do you expect it to happen?
Yeah, so, I mean, the only honest answer is, like, we don't know exactly when we're going to be in federal court. Like, we expect to win, right? We don't really go into these court challenges unless it's something that we expect to win on. And as I mentioned before, like, just the rationale that the CBC has given, we just think is completely bogus. And even though they use Section 18B as a rationale that, like, somehow releasing the total amount of dollars that they spent on advertising is going to hurt their competitiveness, like, as I mentioned earlier, the rationale doesn't have much ground to stand on, so we're quite confident that we're in the right here and that we're going to set an important principle for transparency for taxpayers. But unfortunately, we just don't have I can't give you a strong estimate of a timeline of when this will take place.
Well, we will continue to watch with great interest. For those that want to stay up to date on what the Canadian Taxpayer Federation is doing, make sure you check out their YouTube channel. There's a lot of great videos that are dropping constantly. They're constantly updating their website, and they can follow Franco at, I believe, Franconomics on X. Is that right?
Yeah, on X it's at Franco_nomics, and sorry, the website is actually taxpayer.com. Check out our newsroom, check out our petitions. We love when you guys read some of the great work that we're doing, and especially that Ryan Thorpe over there is digging up.
And Ryan, where can everybody follow you at?
I'm on X or Twitter at RK_Thorpe. And then, taxpayer.com. Check out our newsroom. Any of the stories that I write up get posted on there.
Okay. Thank you both for continuing the fight as always. And we look forward to what these challenges end up revealing once you finally get that information.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having us on. Love the chat.